Oh no, it's all fantasy. No, I can't talk about fantasy, damn it! Hello, everybody, and welcome to a little bit of a different video here on the channel. I'm constantly asked about what are my favorite non-sci-fi fantasy books. I don't really like talking about non-sci-fi fantasy here on the channel because they are my favorite genres, but for my analytics, although a lot of people ask about that if I ever do talk about things that don't fall into that specific genre, it doesn't do well, so I have to be careful. But I figured I could do one video where I recommend my top 3 non-sci-fi fantasy reads, because I just want to get this out there. Yes, these are my favorite non-sci-fi fantasy books of all time. I do have others I respect more, a lot of classics, a lot of things like that that have been more influential. But for me, I wanted to just throw in all the pretentiousness out of the window, the 3 non-sci-fi fantasy picks that I just have the legitimate most enjoyment in reading. And you're gonna probably notice a lot of reflection to my sci-fi fantasy tastes. It's almost like the genres are just allowing certain things to happen, and these books are just gonna reflect a lot of the typical things I do like and enjoy. And I am also being extremely harsh with the sci-fi fantasy label here. These books cannot have any elements of science fiction or fantasy there. So while yes, things like Dracula or Fahrenheit 451 are definitely my top reads of all time, they cannot be included here. No Master and Margarita because there's fantasy elements. 100% just fiction that is outside the Venn diagram of sci-fi fantasy. So here are my top picks. First, I want to go with an honorable mention for one author I just do like a lot. This is not my top 3, it's just a general recommendation for people who have not read any of Ernest Hemingway. I adore the man's writing style. He's able to keep things rather simple while still telling beautiful and poetic stories. There's this one quote from a critic that essentially said, like, Ernest Hemingway doesn't know how to describe things beautifully with like 3-syllable words or something along that lines. And Ernest Hemingway responded by being like, if you think you need 3-syllable words to describe something beautiful, you're an idiot. And I agree with him. I think that's why his prose is such a large appeal of his writing. He comes across very directly, very powerfully, and I just think he kind of has this reputation now of being like the dude bro classic author, where a lot of people will just read like Old Man of the Sea and claim they're Ernest Hemingway fans and not go into his wider, deeper works. I think that's a massive disservice. Pick up For Whom the Bell Tolls, pick up A Farewell to Arms, pick up a lot of his stuff because it holds up, it's extraordinarily good, and a lot of it's like weirdly actually semi-biographical, either other people's stories or his own, which just kind of adds an interesting flair of research behind the scenes of looking into it. But that's not actually in my top 3. It's just a general recommendation for that. I love the guy's work. And now let's get into number 3. The Millennium series, or as the first book is much better known, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. This has a weird reputation around it now that isn't always the most representative of what the books are, especially with this most recent movie, which I didn't even bother seeing because it looked like a horrendous disservice to the character of Elizabeth. But here is the truth, at least from my perspective, of what The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is and why it'll be worth your time. 1, if you like the writing style of Joe Abercrombie, you will love these books, especially if you adore his character work, because I find them to be on very similar levels and have a very similar appeal. These are, if we're talking in fantasy terms, grimdark in the way that they present humanity. These are not happy books. And they also have one of the best defined and understood characters I've ever come across in Lisbeth Salander, whose arc is heartbreaking and also weirdly hopeful. She's extraordinary. Unfortunately, the original author did die after the first 3 books, and they fell off, in my opinion, quite harshly once someone else took over. I read the first 2 of the new author. I did not like them as much, so to me, they are just a standalone trilogy. And I actually do like the English-American movie that came out back in the day with Rooney Mara, who did a stupendous job of portraying Lisbeth Salander, and Daniel Craig as Mikael Blomkvist, and the Swedish movies are definitely a good adaptation of these books. I know there's some hate for the American version. I don't get why. I think the performances are great. There's actually not really many changes to the book that offend me at all, but let's get into the story itself. It's maybe the most realistic depiction of software engineering and hacking I've ever seen. Appreciate the realism there, but this revolves around a mystery mystery. A girl is murdered, and for years, one of her relatives has been tormented by the person who killed this girl. So finally, after hearing about one of the main characters, Mikhail Blomkvist's recent career-ending scandal, he hires him as an investigator to try and find out what actually happened to this young girl he loved back in the 70s or 80s, whenever it's supposed to happen. And from there, what we get is one of the most savage, brutal, and relentless mystery thrillers I have ever experienced. It's definitely on that Seven vibe, kind of this horrendous take on humanity that hits all the harder because we know so many of the problems presented in this book are in the real world, whether it's how people with, slight mental illnesses are abused, the way women are mistreated or looked down upon, corporate criminals who get away with doing awful, awful things, and rich legacy families who can have, shady stuff going on. I'll leave it at that. We'll put a massive content warning on this one. Yes, it is in that Joe Abercrombie style, but I would say this book is more graphic in its depictions of many of the darker side of things than Joe Abercrombie has actually ever gotten. You will see sexual violence and things like that penned in detail in page after page, but it is never exploitative. It is more an actual just forcing the reader to realize that these things happen in the world today, and if you ignore them, you're a part of the problem. That's one of the big themes that I find in this trilogy. All three of the original books are 10 out of 10s for me. I don't think there is a flaw there. With the later books, the first two I read, I would say they dropped down to a 6, mainly because the new author, in my opinion, did not understand the character of Elizabeth Salander, and I just didn't like what he did with her from there. But these 3 books are definitely a complete story, so if you'd like to check them out, highly, highly recommend you do, and they are in my top books of all time. I really want to hit home one last time. Massive Joe Abercrombie appeal. I don't know why, but it just reads to me in a similar way to him and his depiction of people, maybe just less witty characters and drier and slower. But aside from that, very Joe Abercrombie way of handling people and story. Next up is another Debbie Downer, I would say. Not the happiest tale. Don't worry, the final pick is a little bit more on the up and up. But The Road by Cormac McCarthy is a extraordinarily good post-apocalyptic book, but I think many of you did read this because The Road was tremendously popular for a while, and the movie adaptation helped propel it to even higher heights. Viggo Mortensen did an extraordinary job at adapting this bleak, hopeless, not some happy adventure story to the screen. And to anyone out there who has not read this, this is one of my favorite books of all time. I do have a video on my channel that's very old and bad now where I praise it and just heap all of my love for this book out there. And it's not one I think people are going to want to read right now because of just how dreary the world is, the days are. So if you're not in the mood to experience something that's just going to pull you even deeper, don't pick up The Road. It is actually the most depressing story I have ever read. I've read a lot of books. None of them have been as depressing as The Road. Yet, even though it is so not in the tone I approve of, even though it is so just dreary and dreadful, I flew through this book because it is so tantalizingly seductive in its horrific view of the future, this post-apocalyptic world where you're following a father and son, not even as they really have oh, this will save us goal, just their survival and chasing after some arbitrary perception of something that can improve their situation. It's not like an I Am Legend or something like that where people often say it's dark. It's not gothic. This is dark in the way of oh, this is if everything went to hell on earth, what the world would be like. I've heard many people say that there's a specific scene within The Road I won't spoil that is arguably the most disturbing scene in a book you can read. There are few scenes on this scale or level that will fail to turn your stomach like The Road did, and just be prepared if you choose to pick up Cormac McCarthy's The Road to very much so resent me for recommending this to you, while simultaneously probably adding it to your top lists of all time, because it is a masterful execution of something that is so unrelentingly bleak and depressing. Do not expect typical pacing, do not expect typical story structure in the full grand scope of what is written here in the narrative, because this is not somehow a traditional story in the sense that there's achievable goals. It is more just a glimpse in the life of surviving a dead Earth. And finally, for those of you who've been around for a long time on the channel or have watched a high percentage of my videos, you know what my #1 recommendation is going to be, and that is going to be the Sherlock Holmes series by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I love these books. I also really enjoy many of the adaptations of Sherlock Holmes, but none of them have done the character full service and justice. There's actually like rights reasons behind the scenes that are actually kind of why that's the case. There's actually like a thing in place that's like stopping. It's a long, convoluted story. But yes, Sherlock Holmes is one of the best characters in all of literature. There's a reason that he is the most adapted character of all time. I believe that holds up. I think you can count it in different ways, and he is or is not, but he's definitely up there in the most adapted characters ever, from cartoons to movies to shows. This character has never fully left the zeitgeist of pop culture. We will never forget Sherlock Holmes, and many people kind of seem mystified as to why that is. Why is there constantly Sherlock Holmes stories being brought to us? It's because he's so damn good in the books. No one I know, nobody I know my age, even like through BookTube, has read the full Sherlock Holmes series. Actually, I think Murphy Napier has. Sorry, that was a misrepresentation. I say that because she gave me this gorgeous, beautiful, stunning box set of Sherlock Holmes books. And I actually like this box set so much, I left my original ones in storage, and now I just have these. But they're so short. Look at these. These were released in newspapers a long time ago. You can get through Sherlock Holmes books so well, and they have aged phenomenally. Oh my god. Reading these feels like they could have been released by a top-of-the-line S-tier author today, and each one brings something new to the table. And it's not just like some typical detective whatever where the character never evolves and it's just like a rinse repeat. Every Sherlock Holmes story, one, you can figure it out as Sherlock Holmes does if you're smart enough, I believe. There might be a couple where it's like no, but Sir Arthur Conan Doyle actually did an extraordinary job of giving you what you need to follow along with Sherlock's if you're quick-witted enough. And the character himself evolves and changes drastically over the course of all these stories. And his relationship with Watson becomes more intense and wonderful, honestly. I love, love, love what's done here. There's certain elements to the character of Sherlock Holmes that have actually never been brought to an adaptation I've seen. Some of the darker and lighter sides to him. It depends on how far into the books you are. And I cannot stress enough that if you are a fan of mystery, like I am myself, if you cannot tell from 2 out of my 3 picks, there probably has never been an author who has written better, consistent mystery stories ever. Each one is better than the ways they've been adapted. I know that sounds like snobby, I'm not trying to come across that way, but whether it's the Hounds of Baskerville or really from beginning to end, every single one I've seen adapted was better in the book. Better presented, better structured, better paced out, better information spills, the way Sir Arthur Conan Doyle did. I want to see just a true-to-life, word-for-word adaptation of the Sherlock Holmes books, because I think it would work. And I'm the guy who is constantly saying, I understand why you need to change stuff. Not here. They're perfect. Everything's perfect. The characters, the villains, this progression, it's magnificent. Just adapt it the way it is. You Alright, I know, I need to stop. I need to stop and chill. It's my favorite maybe character ever. Arguably only topped by Elizabeth Salander or a few fantasy characters like Rand, but I can't mention them right now because we're doing a 5-5 fantasy list. Oh no, it's all fantasy. No, I can't talk about fantasy, damn it! Anyway, those are my top 3 non-sci-fi fantasy recommendations. I've heard some people try to make the case that Sherlock Holmes is fantasy because he's like super intelligent. Stop. Let me put it in this video. Let me know what your favorite non-sci-fi fantasy reads of all time are in the comments down below. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. I'm gonna clean up some books. Peace!